Editing can feel pretty overwhelming, especially after you've put in all the hard work getting your book on paper. Let's simplify the editing process by working through some straightforward questions and checklists. There are many types of editing with different names, but here are 3 basic ones to consider: developmental or structural editing, copy editing, and proofreading. Developmental editing focuses on the content of your book, while copy editing and proofreading focus on more superficial edits such as grammar, word choice, spelling, and punctuation. Developmental editing takes a look at your story or even the outline of your book if you're still in the writing process. A developmental editor can suggest large changes such as rearranging parts of your plot, deleting whole scenes, adding or subtracting conflicting details, fixing character inconsistencies, etc. For a nonfiction book, a developmental editor may suggest adding information, fleshing out paragraphs, or removing them altogether, rearranging topics and subtopics, etc. Sometimes the term structural editing is used to describe a separate step in the editing process. Developmental editing can actually take place during the planning phase before you have completed any major writing. A developmental editor may help you line up each element of your book to prevent you from having to go back and make major changes after the book has been written. In this case, the structural edit would take place after the book has been written and assess the same elements as the developmental edit. Copy editing assesses consistency within the text, word choice, grammar, punctuation, readability, accuracy, etc. This step basically makes sure your book looks and sounds professional and clean. Proofreading is the final check. Like copy editing, proofreading looks for errors in grammar, word choice, and punctuation. This final edit ensures that the manuscript is ready for publication. To simplify the process of editing your book, we will break these edits down into 2 categories: content editing and superficial editing. Each category will present a series of questions to ask yourself when reviewing your book. These questions may also be shared with friends and family who agree to help with the editing process. Editing can feel pretty tedious, and you do have the option to hire someone to take care of the editing for you. However, hiring a professional editor to take care of everything usually costs more than $1,000. But of course, you should get a second set of eyes on your book. Get as many eyes on it as you can. While writing, you probably love your story, and it may feel pretty solid to you after a couple of self-edits. However, the outside readers will likely notice inconsistencies and errors you didn't find, and may be able to suggest ways to create a richer manuscript. Don't be afraid to accept constructive criticism. It can be hard at first. After all, you've labored hard over this baby, but receiving criticism gets much easier over time, and the more you receive, the more you learn. Of course, this doesn't mean you have to apply every bit of advice you get, but it's often wise to at least consider such suggestions. I created a worksheet for you to fill out that will help you work through the editing process. The link to download and print that worksheet is in the description. Let's take a look at that worksheet now. These are all questions to consider while editing your book. Part 1, Content Editing. For fiction, take a look at your 3-act structure. Does Act 1 establish a story goal and end in a major disaster? Does Act 2 end in an even greater disaster? Does Act 3 address the story goal, for better or worse? Does each act occupy roughly 1/3 of your book? Does your main character experience enough conflict? Or does he or she simply drift through the story? Can you feel the struggle and the tension from page to page? What's going to keep your readers turning from page to page and staying up at late hours of the night? Pacing, let's just note what pacing is. It's what parts of the story really drive the reader forward and what parts slow the reader down. That's something to pay attention to. Does your main character have a story goal? What is it? Does he or she consistently try to work towards that goal throughout the entirety of the book? How developed is your story world? Does the reader feel he or she can step into the novel? Are your characters dynamic? Which characters change? Which ones are relatively stagnant? Is this the way you meant for the story to go? Should any of your characters experience more or less change? Does each character act as if he is the hero of his own story? Or do all characters revolve around the main character? A little hint here, you don't want everything to revolve around the main character. Obviously, it's a little different in a story like Harry Potter, where he kind of is a very big person in that society. He's kind of a celebrity in a sense. However, the characters still aren't going to act like he's the only person that the story is about. They're all acting like they have their own story, they have their own goals, they have their own lives that they're living. Otherwise, the story is going to start to feel very fake and very superficial. Does each of your characters, at least anyone with significance in the story, have a rich and complex life, background, etc.? Does each character have a goal or something he or she would like to change? What do you know about your characters? What struggles have they been through? What motivates them? What do they enjoy? What do they hate? Who are their friends and family? What education do they have? What are their careers? It's highly probable that you are going to know 10 times, 100 times more about your story and your characters than your readers will ever know. This creates a very rich and complex novel, and definitely gives the reader the feeling that this world really exists, this world that you've created, and these characters are very real and relatable. Does the order of scenes make sense in your story? Should you rearrange anything to improve flow or increase suspense? Do you have a catching opener? What draws your reader into the story? What conflicts keep your reader turning the pages? Where is the climax in your book? Is it appropriately placed? Do the events and individual scenes in your story lead to the climax? Do you give your reader an emotional experience? Or is your story a bit too dry? What scenes may need more drive? Another little hint, adding appropriate conflict gives your reader a more emotional experience. Giving your characters an easy ride is quite boring to read. Are there any plot holes you notice as you review the story? Is the story relatively plausible? While there are many, many other possible questions to consider, this list should encompass a pretty thorough edit. Hopefully, as you work through these questions, you will think of additional content errors to address within your manuscript. Now, for nonfiction, if you are still in the planning phase, have you collected enough references and literary resources? Do you have an outline for your book? If not, jot down a quick outline with the main topic of the book and its subcategories, including subcategories. Does the order of the subcategories make sense? Do you need to add any other sections to thoroughly cover the subject? Is each topic easy to understand and follow? Start by explaining your topics on a broader level, then gradually include more specific details. It may be helpful to share your book with another expert on the topic for another take on the material. This person may be able to suggest additional perspectives, supporting evidence, or information that you could include in your book. For example, if you wrote a book about olives all over the world, then find somebody else who's very interested in olives, or somebody who is an expert on olives, and they can read through your book and they may have experience that you don't have, and they can suggest some places to do more research, or maybe even just add some funny stories about olives. Who knows? But they can definitely enrich your book. You may even find somebody who could write a foreword to your book and actually contribute to it. Who knows? All right, let's jump into part 2. This is your superficial edits. So we just have a checklist of things that we need to follow here and make sure that we complete each one of these items while we're doing our edit. The first one is going to be your spelling and grammar check. And you can do this pretty easily by running your document through a spelling and grammar check through a word processor such as Microsoft Word or Grammarly. Grammarly does have free spelling and grammar checks, but they also have a paid version that goes into a little bit more depth and can find some word choice errors and other errors that you may not catch yourself, and it's pretty thorough. Then while reading through your manuscript, make sure to correct any misspellings and grammar issues not detected. This is most likely to occur when you are using a homophone. For example, you may have written the word break, B-R-A-K-E, when you meant to write the word break, B-R-E-A-K. Next, check for heading inconsistencies. All the words in your headings and subheadings should be capitalized. If you choose to keep them lowercase for stylistic reasons, that's up to you. Just make sure that you are consistent across the entire manuscript. So subheadings of the same type should either all be lowercase or all be uppercase across the manuscript. Make sure to follow title capitalization rules. For example, the first and last word should always be capitalized. Do not capitalize prepositions, articles, which are a and the, or coordinating conjunctions, unless the word is the last word in the title. For factual books, or any book that takes information from outside sources, make sure to include an accurate bibliography. Next, pay attention to word choice. Notice words and phrases that are repeated too frequently and consider alternate word choices. For example, instead of using the word said every time a character speaks, consider using more emotive words such as expressed, intoned, shouted, or hummed. Next, fix sentences that are too wordy, unclear, unreasonably long, etc. Make sure that point of view and tense are consistent across the entire manuscript. And of course, depending on what sort of story you're writing, it may change from scene to scene. You could have one scene that takes place in a first-person point of view and another one that takes place in a third-person point of view, but make sure that it is appropriate for the scene and that it is consistent across your manuscript. This list may feel pretty overwhelming, especially if this is your first time tackling editing. I know I certainly enjoy seeing my book to completion as quickly as possible. It can be so tempting to rush through editing to finally see my book in print. After all, I've spent a ton of time already just writing the book, right? Just trust that your patience and hard work will pay off in the end, I promise. Taking the time to thoroughly edit your book will produce a higher quality product and make you a better writer. Make sure to get additional eyes on your book, either by hiring a professional editor or by sharing your book with others who are willing to read and edit. You can do this. Now you're one step closer to taking your book from written to published.